Thank you, everyone. Everyone who's here, everyone who's on the bridge. It sounds like we have quite a lively crew on the bridge. We have quite a few people who are dialed in this morning. It's wonderful that we can participate that way. I should have the high-speed internet in the building hopefully in a week, and we'll be able to start going live streaming on the bridge, on the internet, so we can do audio and video on the internet. So we're very close to that. We're talking about trust this month, and remember last week we talked about in God we trust, all others pay cash, right? And Lori found out this week that one of my favorite humorists, Gene Shepard, and if you're a fan of the movie The Christmas Story about the little boy that wanted a BB gun with a compass in the stock, that was a semi-autobiographical story about Gene Shepard growing up in the middle of the Depression. He was a funny man. He used to broadcast, when I was a kid, he used to broadcast on radio in New York. He had a show for 15 minutes every night. And then on Saturday night, he would go 3 hours from a coffee shop in Greenwich Village, New York. And he would just ramble. It would seem like he was just rambling forever. And at the end of the third hour on Saturday night, everything that he had been rambling about for the whole week just came together. It was so funny. Funny man. So this week we're going to go and take a look at some inspiration from Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's impossible, I think, to talk about trust without talking about the topic of self-trust or self-reliance. And I want you to keep in mind, self-reliance, as Emerson has it written, is with a capital S. And self-reliance. And as Lori said in the opening reading, to understand that we are all the microcosm of the macrocosm. We are all just a tiny little piece of that which is so much bigger than we are. But yet, it's like a hologram. It's like you take that one little chip and you the entirety of whatever it represents in that one little piece. And what we want to keep in mind as we go through this is that you and I, and everything and everyone, not just you and I. It's not good enough for us to say, well, this is true of me, but I'm not so sure about those people across the street. Each and every one is a beautiful, intimate expression of that one life. That's why we can rely on it. That's why we can trust in it. That's what we're going to talk about today. Now, having talked a little bit about Greenwich Village and coffee shops and things like that, many of you know that I grew up in New York City. And I went to high school on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, 2nd Avenue and 2nd Street, Lower East Side of Manhattan, in the 60s. So we were right there, right in the middle of it. And the neighborhood was a very eclectic neighborhood. On the way to school in the morning, I would pass the homeless people because the Bowery was right there. We would pass the communes of hippies who you would see 50 or 60 people in back storefronts. And then we would go past the Greek Orthodox Church on the way to school, and the bishop would be coming out with his wife and maybe 8 or 10 kids trailing behind. It was just all kinds of different experiences in the neighborhood. But culture wasn't exactly one of those. The arts were not exactly one of those. So what the Christian do in order to give us some couth, as we would say, is they would take us on a field trip. Remember field trips in high school? Boondoggle! We would go on a field trip. They would put us on the subway. We would go somewhere else in Manhattan. We didn't know where. It was somewhere else. They had theaters. We'd never been there. We didn't know. And they took us and they exposed us to things like the ballet. Now, can you imagine taking a bunch of 16-year-old kids from New York to the ballet? It wasn't the brightest idea anybody in the world ever had. You know, the catcalls coming out of the audience, nice tutu, you know? It was crude, believe me. And one day they took us to see Shakespeare. They took us to see just a little bit of Shakespeare. And we went back to school, and the brother was trying to get us to process what we had been exposed to, like anybody paid attention. And one kid said, I don't understand why everybody says that Shakespeare is such a good writer. All he does is string cliches together. You see? So, Emerson is kind of like that. Emerson is so well known that it's almost impossible to pick up anything that he wrote without going, oh, I've heard that before. Oh, and like they've taken cliches and kind of strung them together. But these were original ideas that Emerson was sharing with the world starting in the 1830s and the 1820s. And I'm just going to pull some things out so you can go, the voices which we hear in solitude grow faint and inaudible as we enter into the world. Society everywhere is in a conspiracy against the personhood of every one of its members. And we go, ooh. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. Ooh. Not too. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. You see, these things kind of, boom, they just reach into your heart and they grab you and they shake you. And it resonates. You know, I like that commercial they had with Ella Fitzgerald, Is It Real or Memorex? You know, she'd sing and then the glass would shatter. Why does the glass shatter? Because the glass is in harmony with the note that she is singing. The air moves and vibrates with her vocal cord, and the glass starts to shatter, to vibrate at exactly the same frequency. It is tuned to it. And when it vibrates enough, it shatters. See, that's what resonance is all about. And there is something when we hear the truth, there is something within us that resonates, that vibrates. Like if you were in an orchestra pit, if somebody plucked a string on one instrument, all the other strings that were tuned to that same frequency would start to vibrate. So there's something in us that already knows that. That's what we have to remember. We go, ooh, because there's something within us that already knew that. And it's as if we had been reminded of it. And we go, yes. Yes. Now, I want to put Emerson in context. It's very important to do this. Laurie said he was born in 1802, and you have to remember what happened just a few years before that. In the late 1700s, what happened on this continent a few years before that was some of the British colonies, not all, some of the British colonies were able to declare their independence from the crown. None of the British colonies had ever done that before successfully. But what was to become these United States of America did. And as when we were talking about the 4th of July, when we were talking about freedom, they declared the right to be self-reliant. They declared the right to determine for themselves what it was in their own best interest that would lead to a greater experience of life, of liberty, and of the pursuit of happiness. What was happening was this sentiment was building that said we don't have to do it the old way anymore. We don't have to be subject to the old rules and regulations. We don't have to think the old way anymore. We don't need the monarchy to tell us what we can or cannot do, what we might or might not own. We have a right to declare for ourselves our independence, our self-reliance. Now that idea didn't stop with just politics. That idea just didn't stop with the Declaration of Independence and Revolution. This idea was something that is welling up within the human psyche. It's something within everybody that goes, ooh. Right? A few years later, the French said, ooh. And they had a revolution as well. They didn't handle it as well as ours, but they had a revolution as well. But what was going on in the popular thought at the time, what was happening is people were saying, we don't have to do it that way anymore. It spilled over into religion, and it spilled over into medicine. In those days, the physicians were the best educated people in the town. The clergy were the best educated people in the town, and frequently they were one person. which meant if you were sick, you went to the doctor who was the priest or the minister. And what it also meant was, if you weren't satisfied with the course of the treatment or the progress you were making and you wanted to seek out alternative therapy, you frequently had to go to somebody who had different religious viewpoints. But keep in mind what was welling up in society at the time that says we don't have to do it the old way any longer. We have the right to think and for ourselves. This is where Emerson and the Transcendentalists burst onto the scene. Emerson was a complete radical of his day as far as society was concerned. The Transcendentalist philosophy was decried as being terrible because what did it say? It said that there is a spiritual principle that permeates us, and we can't know it in the ordinary way. We can't know it through facts and weight and measure and scientific theory. We have to experience it. We have to know it by intuition. As Joel Goldsmith would say, we have to know it by grace. As Jesus would say, you have to go within and be in the closet and stay with the Most High. Ernest Holmes would say, sit still and go home with cause. What Emerson was saying is that the world of materialistic or materialism philosophy was saying that that which is can be weighed, can be measured, can be felt, can be seen, can be heard. And what Emerson is saying is what all the great mystics have said is that which is real is none of those. That which is real is the cause of that which can be seen and can be heard and can be felt and can be touched and can be weighed and measured. And you will not know thought. You have to be one with the thinker. So Emerson had been a Unitarian minister, but he resigned in 1832. And in 1830, the Harvard Divinity School, which is where they graduated Unity ministers, they invited him to come and speak. Now you may have heard of the famous Divinity School address, which got Emerson in a lot of trouble with Harvard. They criticized him, they condemned him, they complained about him, and they wouldn't have him back for 50 years. But when they did, they decided that he was a genius. And what Emerson did was he went to the Divinity School and he addressed the graduating class, which, by the way, I found out this morning was only 6 people. Okay. We tend to think of a graduating class at Harvard with, auditoriums full of people. Six. There's actually 7, but one of them didn't show. And what Emerson told them is this. He told them, and I'm paraphrasing greatly here, that if you are going out into the world to teach people to buy into a religion that binds them, you're not doing a service. That what you need to be doing is helping people find the spirit within them to commune with it. He was very, very blunt in saying that what happened is the organizations had become self-serving. And with any organization, I don't care if it's a church or a political organization, any organization, what happens is it eventually decides that preserving the organization is the most important thing. Because if you don't preserve the organization, you can't do whatever it is that you came to do. And they lose sight of what they came to do, and they get all wrapped up in preserving the organization. Does anybody remember an obscure movie called The Name of the Rose? Sean Connery was in it? Okay, Lori does. This is your homework assignment. Okay. It's kind of a mystery that's set in the Inquisition in a monastery. And Sean Connery is like a detective monk. He's trying to figure out why all of these other monks are dying. That's as much as I'm going to tell you. But the backdrop of the whole thing is that there's this group of friars who have taken a vow of poverty, and they are asking a heretical question. Did Jesus own the clothes that he wore? And they are being persecuted by the church because to answer that question might deny the church of the funds it needed to operate. In other words, they were saying if Jesus was truly the Christ, if Jesus was truly God, if Jesus was truly Spirit, then he wouldn't own anything. He would be truly have taken a vow of poverty to rely upon God. And in the setting of the screenplay, see, this happens to organizations. And what Emerson was telling people is, he was telling the young ministers, don't get caught up in stained glass windows. Don't get caught up in rituals and ceremony. Get caught up in finding that within the people which is already there, which will already resonate and go, ooh, when they hear the truth. And let that be what you do. And of course, that was a threat. That was a threat to the organization. And Emerson was a threat to the organization. And he had to be put down. And he had to be condemned and criticized and complained about. But isn't that a radical, crazy idea? The presence of God is within you. It's within me. You already know. It already knows. And the true purpose of religion is to awaken that, to nurture that, to educate, if you will, to draw out of, rather than to teach, to put into, but to bring that out. Idea. So this is the Emerson who then turns. We could sit there and go, yeah, tell them ministers that. Boy, those guys needed to hear that. But he turns right on us, you see. And he turns it right to the individual with self-reliance. I'm going to read you a couple paragraphs, but I want you to drink this in. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius. Speak your latent conviction, and it shall be the universal sense. For the inmost in due time becomes the outmost, and our first thought is rendered back to us by the trumpets of the last judgment. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought, because it is his. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. Great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impression with good-humored inflexibility, then when most of the whole cry of voices is on the other side. Else tomorrow a stranger will say, with masterly good sense, precisely what we have thought and felt all the time. And we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another. There is a time in every person's education when he or she arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that we must take for ourselves, for better or worse, as our portion, that though the universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to us, but through our toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to us to till. The power which resides in us is new in nature, and none but us knows that which it is which we can do, nor do we know until we have tried. Not for nothing, one face, one character, or one fact makes much impression on us, and on another, none. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string, except the place in the divine except the place the divine providence has found for you. The society of your contemporaries, the connection of events. Great men have always done so, and confided themselves childlike to the genius of their age. And then he goes on, and I'll close the reading with, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. If you would be a person, speak today what you think in words as hard as cannonballs, and tomorrow speak again, though it contradict everything you said today. Ooh. All right. Ooh. So what does that mean to us who go, ooh, ooh, I feel it. I feel that tugging at my heartstring. All he is telling us quite simply is that we must learn to trust that within us which knows, and stop seeking opinions and direction and guidance from everybody else who doesn't know, who cannot know because they are not us. They have their own plot of ground to till. They have their own sow. They have their own gifts to find and give. But we spend our lives going around asking everybody, well, what do you think? Well, what do you think? Well, what do you think? We have the answer. We have what we're looking for. It's already here. Why are we asking somebody else to tell us what we can't know and only we can? And yet we do that. There are entire industries built around this. You remember when the 900 psychic lines were so popular? And then they arrested a lady because she forgot to pay her taxes or something. That was crazy. But people do that. They will pay somebody else to divine for them and to tell them that which they already know. And they will pay good money and a lot of it. And there's going to be no shortage of people when they figure that out who are willing to sit there and to tell you exactly what you want to hear for a fee. They're everywhere. Next time you go to the hair, how many people are asking for advice? If you stop for a cocktail, bartenders make their living. Okay? I'll never forget, another important part of my education when I was a kid in New York was the racetrack. I lived 2 subway stops from Aqueduct. And one of my friends, who was older than I was, took me to races one time to teach me some couth. Because he was not into Shakespeare. I had a very interesting background. But he took me, in the racetrack, they had the little snack bars, and in the snack bar, they had a bar that sold alcohol, and then they had a place where you could get soft drinks, and they had hot dogs and things. So we went and got a couple of hot dogs and a couple of sodas, and we're sitting there at one of those big tables, big high tables, round ones like you have at the airports. And he says, watch the bartender over there. He says, watch that bartender. I said, okay. So somebody comes in to the bartender and they order a drink, and the bartender gives them a drink, and they next race. And the bartender says, the 2 horse. And they say, and the bartender, horse hits. What's going on? Comes in and they said to the bartender, who do you like in the next race? And the bartender said, the 3 horse. There's only 9 horses in a race. Every 9th time he was right. And nobody ever stopped to ask, if this guy is so good with the horses, why is he tending bar? Why isn't he just sitting up there in the players' lounge making lots and lots of money? We do this. We go and we ask somebody else for an opinion instead of turning to that within which already knows. So what he is telling us is that we look at the things that kind of to suck our self-reliance away from us, the things that we kind of surrender to as human beings. And I think growing up in the 60s in the Lower East Side was probably a great place to learn this, because that's what the country did, the way that our parents did it. Remember, our parents during the Depression, and they lived through the Second World War. And in the Second World War, the motto was, we have a job to do. And you did whatever job the government gave you to do, whether it was to fly a B-17 or whether it was to sail a ship. You did what you were told to do because that's what society needed from you to do. And God bless the people who did those things so we could be free. But in the 60s, people pushed back and said, we're not going to let somebody else tell us what to do. So society wants conformity. They want us all to fit in. They want us all to be alike. And why do they want us all to be alike? Because it is for the good of society. Is it for the good of the... No, it's for the good of society. We need to protect this organization called society. Watch what goes on in politics now. Just observe. I'm not trying to take sides. I just want you to observe. But we have had a two-party system for a long time, and now it looks like we're getting a third party to emerge, which happens about every 20 years. And watch what will happen. The two parties will suddenly turn around and say, we need to protect the two-party system. Why? Why do we need to do that? Because they know how it works. They're the ones that benefit from it. So society tries to protect itself. I listened to an interesting interview one time on the radio. There was a gentleman who was a Buddhist monk. And he was here in the U.S., and he was kind of like the head of some monasteries here in the U.S. And the interviewer was kind of, he wasn't mean, but he was antagonistic in his questions, like, yeah, right, this isn't going to work. And he said to the monk, he said, well, tell us about Buddhist society. Tell us what it's like to live in Buddhist society. And the gentleman said, well, he says, in the Buddhist society, he says, the most important thing is the growth of the individual soul. And it is the purpose of society to provide a framework in which each individual can pursue the growth of that is appropriate. I thought, that's pretty good to me. It almost sounds like governments are created to preserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It almost sounded like that, and just kind of stated in a spiritual sense, right? And here's what the interviewer said. He said, that will never work. How could that work? That will never work. What are we all going to do? All just going to quit our jobs and go sit in a monastery and own? Who's going to grow the food? And he immediately began to outline all the reasons why he thought it wouldn't work. And, monks are generally kind in nature, and they chuckle a little bit. And he just said, well, I understand what you're saying. He says, but that's not the way spiritual growth works. He says, not everybody's ready for the monastery experience at the same time. He says, some people are ready for the I have to work and share experience. And we all come into this world at different levels of growth. We all come in to do different things, and the society as a whole balances itself out. And he went on to this gentleman historically the different Buddhist societies in history and how prosperous they were, because they focused on the soul, not on protecting the society. So society requires from us conformity. It wants us to conform. It wants us to do things its way. And if we don't do it society's way, what happens? We get ostracized. Right? We know that we have performed a taboo. We know that we have done something that is frowned upon by society. And they try to make us to be an outcast. What Emerson tells us is we have to get over that. We have to realize that conformity is a slow death. Conformity is asking us to give up the freedom of our soul to do something that somebody else wants us to do because they tell us that they know what we ought to do when they are in fact telling us what is better for society, not for us, for protecting the organization. And he says what we have to learn to do is declare our own truth, to stand in our own truth, and to allow everybody else to do the same. And if everybody else sees things differently, that's fine. We don't have to argue with them. We don't have to try to save them or convert them. We just go our way and we let them go their way. So the first thing you want to look for in your life, if you're putting yourself on the self-reliance gauge, how much conformity is important to you? Or how much is conformity important to you? That's probably more good or English. So, how much is conformity? How much conformity is important to you? Would you rather get along? Would you rather fit in? Would you rather not rock the boat? Or would you rather let the song be sung? I think we know the answer. I think it's an ooh. Consistency. Consistency, a foolish consistency, is the hobgoblin of little minds. We have always done it this way in the past. We need to continue to do it this way in the future. Why? Who said so and why? Why are we looking over our shoulders when Emerson asks us, why are we looking over our shoulder when we need to go forward? Or as that great philosopher Satchel Paige said, don't look back, somebody might be gaining on you. Keep your eyes ahead and keep going. Where is it that you're going? It doesn't matter where you've been. I think I've told you this when I learned how to fly airplanes. My instructor one day told me that there is nothing more useless to a pilot than a runway behind the plane. Can't do anything with it. Not going to help you. And what he was trying to teach me was I had positioned the plane too far down the runway for takeoff. I had a whole bunch of runway behind me that I could have put the plane all the way down the end and had lots of room to take off, but I decided to take off from midfield. I didn't want to push the plane back. I told you it was a glider. It didn't have an engine. I didn't want to push it. I was lazy. I didn't want to push it down the end of the runway. And we'll take off from here. There is nothing more useless to us than that's what's behind us in terms of do for us in the future. Why do we do it that way? I just want you to keep this one thing in mind. If consistency was the most important thing in the world, nothing new would ever happen. Because by definition, that which is new happened before. And you look at every time somebody is trying to do something new, what happens? They told the Wright brothers that thing will never fly. They told Roger Bannister you'll never run that mile in less than 4 minutes. They said that we will never get that rocket to the moon, and to this day there are people who say we did not. That it was all done in a Hollywood sound studio. Galileo said everything in the galaxy does not revolve around the Earth. And he paid dearly for it. Society and consistency doesn't like new ideas. But you are something new. This is what Emerson is telling us. You are a new expression of God. You have come here to do something that only you can do. You are the only one who knows what it is. The one who can figure out how to do it because you are part of that. You don't need anybody else to tell you, and you don't need to look how somebody did it in the past, and you don't need to have somebody else give you a piece of paper that says you're qualified to do it. Remember the Wizard of Oz? He just gave him the diploma, and suddenly he was smart. Who was that? That was a scarecrow. The Tin Man got the heart. And the lion got courage. I got it now. If I only had a brain. So now we start to ask ourselves, are we living in the past? How do you know if you're living in the past? You have any regrets? You have any resentment? You have anything that you're holding on to? Come to your mind? It's the holding on to the past that we because that is keeping us from moving forward. So what Emerson implores us to do, and I invite you to go to the internet and download the essay. It's so old it's in the public domain. And I invite you to read the entire essay and get a highlighter and just sit there and read through it and highlight the idea pop out at you. Holmes, who in a rural area, he grew up in Maine, in an uncultured area. When he got to 18 and he read Emerson for the first time, he said it was like drinking sweet water. You get the picture, being out in the country, chopping wood, baling hay, it gets hot, and you get the dipper, and you get the sweet water out of the spring. Emerson was like taking a drink of sweet water to Dr. Holmes. In fact, when Holmes started out, he was billed as an Emersonian lecturer when he first went about. So let's read and study and contemplate what he's telling us in self-reliance. There is a power within each and every particle of the universe. It permeates each and every particle of the universe because each and every particle of the universe. And let's separate ourselves from that realization that that does and it must include us. If God is omniscient, all-knowing, and omnipresent, everywhere present, then the all-knowing of God is right where we are. And it's no more where somebody else is than where we are. No one else has greater access to our answers than we do, because we are one with all that there is. And what Emerson tells us is little by little, one by one, we have to examine our lives. We go through and say, am I addicted to conformity? Am I addicted to consistency? Am I looking to other people outside myself to give me the answers? Am I looking to outside of myself to give me the answers? Am I looking for someone else to take care of me? Do I want the government to take care of me? Do I want somebody else to be responsible for me? And to the degree that we start to give those up and we say, wait a second, what is true here is that there is principle at work in the universe. The principle is that the love of God is here, the presence of God is here, the wisdom of God is here, and the power of God is here. And when we get quiet, when we be still, when we go within, when we seek guidance, then we shall demonstrate that principle is more powerful than consistency, than conformity, than anybody else who would tell us that they know better than we what it is that we ought to do and we ought to be. Think of one person in history, one person who you admire as being a great spirit, and ask yourself if he or she were self-reliant. That is how important it is for each and every one of us to demonstrate that self-reliance, which is an innate part of our lives. The love of God has created each and every one of us as a unique and wonderful expression of its own self. We don't have to beg it for anything. It has already given to itself as us everything that is required, but we must learn to accept. And we will never accept if we are looking outside of ourselves for that which the self, with a capital S, inside already has. Emerson was just one man. He was actually a simple preacher. He got paid by the word at one time, which is why his writings are sometimes so difficult to read. He was ostracized. He was criticized. He was outcast. And he held his ground. And eventually the world came to know him. He came to be widest read, most often quoted authors this country has ever produced. One person sure of their convictions, one person willing to do what they know in their hearts is right, can and will have an impact on millions and millions of lives. But even if they didn't, as long as they have an impact on one, their own, they're making a difference. I invite us then to go forward this week and to declare our self-reliance and to be willing to observe ourselves when we are drifting away from it and to stop ourselves and to say, no, no, no. No one else has my answer. No one else has my good. No one else knows what's best for me but the knower within. I go within to my secret place. I be still, and I know that God is all there is. I want to leave you with a picture. And here's the picture. I want you to imagine that there's a kingdom, and there's a great king in the kingdom. And the king has a son, the prince. And the prince gets separated from the royal family at a very early age. And he doesn't remember who he is. Doesn't remember where he came from. He doesn't have very much. So he becomes a beggar. And one day he goes and he begs at the palace door. And his father opens the door and recognizes him. And he says, "Why are you begging? The entire kingdom is yours. All that the Father has is thine. Ask, believing in your hearts." We have spent too many years of our lives seeking approval, conformity, consistency, advice, and good from outside of ourselves, when within us is the King. Within us is the kingdom. Let's find it. Let's release that splendor. And so it is. I recognize here and now that there's only one life, and it is God, and it is perfect. It is all-knowing, it is all-powerful, it is everywhere present. Everything that it creates out of itself by becoming the thing that is created. Therefore, each and every part of creation, every star, every planet, every galaxy, every blade of grass, every human being, every plant, every animal is some part of God in expression. God in everything, God as everything. There's a wisdom that guides the birds and the fishes in their great migrations, thousands of miles without a chart or a compass. There's a wisdom in the seed that knows when to sprout. There's a wisdom in the soil that knows how to nurture. There's a wisdom in our bodies that knows how to take the food, which is nothing more than the soil taking the form of a plant, and digest it. There's a wisdom that knows how to take the oxygen from the air and give the gift of carbon dioxide back. And we recognize today that we are one with all of that, and that that power has created us out of itself to express its life. And therefore within us is everything that we need to know. And therefore within us is the ability to attract to us and through us everything that we ought to have in order to fulfill this wonderful, unique purpose that God has given to us and that we have said yes to before we arrived. Today we gladly accept our unique purpose in life and everything that goes with it, and we say goodbye to conformity, to consistency, to others' opinion, to others' advice, and we seek only that which matters, the wisdom, the presence, the guidance, the love, the power, the protection of God. We are grateful for this opportunity to be here together today to know these truths. We are grateful to know that there is a principle, a spiritual principle, which is greater than any power created by man. And that spiritual principle now takes this word as our acceptance, as our believing in our heart, and makes it so in our lives. We are so certain this is done that we say together, and so it is.